Welcome again to Social Distillation, the submarine still of the internet, where we attempt to drop the beat and pour white lightning straight onto your brain. So a lot of white lightning last time. We used the eye of the world to go into free will and self-determination and all sorts of other fun things, which is going to be a recurring theme because the pattern is the underlying philosophy of the whole book, really.
Mm-hmm.
Even in the next chapter here, chapter 39, where Rand is meandering around Caemlyn, and kind of, if you dwell too much on it, and sometimes I do feel like Jordan crosses the line a little bit, that the pattern tavern can become a kind of Deus Ex Machina, where the pattern is kind of directing him to the palace wall, where he's going to encounter Elaine and Gawyn and Morgase and all that. Or, the philosophical debate, did the pattern just know that was going to happen? It wasn't directing, it just already knew that was going to happen. So there is kind of a circular thing there that you can get into with this kind of stuff.
Yeah, we're going to try to get through the end of the book today. So It's Sunday afternoon, so we should be able to do it.
Yep.
So if this one ends up long, we apologize. In the beginning. Or skip ahead if you just want to hear last battle stuff. Finale of book battle stuff. We had this in the pre-talk. There. Not the last battle as in the end of the everything, but
yes.
If you're reading the books, there are 13 more, so it's not going to be the last battle, even though it kind of sets up that way.
So speaking of which, we the reader, but Rand is an idiot. So chapter 39 is the first time I remember, if not the first time I found the phrase, at least the first time it jumped out at me, and I thought, stubborn stupid is a great phrase that Jordan uses frequently throughout the series, and I think it's one of his great phrases through the books.
He uses a lot of phrases. I did see a meme when I was looking for good ones for our covers. One was I think it was Nynaeve, but it was Moiraine meeting Agomar. And of course, the Agomar they use in the series, he had the big Fu Manchu and everything going. And she says, I just want to know one thing. What is knuckling your mustaches? Because I don't know what this is. He's always talking about knuckling your mustaches. And I'm, all of us assume it's just kind of like I always do, where I kind of do this down here,
or the sniffers. Women sniff a lot.
Yeah.
What is that? I've seen that as a repeated phrase of what exactly is that?
I mean, is it a general term or is it a specific thing? Can you just do this and that counts? I don't know.
I don't understand. I should have taken more detailed notes because I don't understand all of these.
Well, you brought up to me, you wanted to harp on Master Gil being one of your favorite characters. That's 39.
Yes, Basil Gil.
Yeah.
Jordan is great at creating small characters. There's a saying, there are no small parts, only small actors, and Jordan does a great job of that through the whole series. There are no small characters. There are very, very, very few forgettable characters. And even the people like Gil, you're going to see him again. It's going to be a while, but you're going to remember him. You're going to remember him when he's, oh, that guy. I mean, is it here where we see Bail Doman, or is it? No, I don't think we see him again until next book. But he's another one of those who just pops up out of nowhere, kind of, oh, hey, that guy. But he does such a great job of creating real characters that they stick in your head, which is good because there's going to be a buttload of them. And it's going to start to get more complicated.
I do have a question so we could set precedent here at the beginning. If I make a comment that you wouldn't know without reading the compendium, the supplemental reading material, is that considered a spoiler of future books?
I only if it actually comes up in other books, because there is some stuff in those things that you don't really get in the books. If you want more information, you actually have to read that stuff.
Okay. I think I'll be well within that realm. So, okay. You mentioned having a rant that had to do with the series coming out of these subsequent chapters here.
Yes.
Now, just to point out for those that are just now reading the books, but you have watched the series, if you're in Caemlyn in the books, remember that Caemlyn was completely skipped in the show.
But the big rant is actually going to be when it towards the beginning of the Great Hunt.
Okay, hold on just a second. I think I have to help with the dogs.
Okay.
Set people up for what we're going to talk about.
Okay, so through to the end of this book, there are some more things revealed. Obviously, there are some big things that happen, things that have been hinted at, that are then going to set up through the rest of the series. But one of the things I really like about it, one of the reasons it's taken us so long to get through this first book, and I'm already like halfway through the Great Hunt now, just having started it a few days ago. Yeah, a little more than halfway now. But so much of what we were talking about, especially in those first few chapters in Emond's Field, is so much of what is going on in this book is setup of things that are going to continually pop up, continually reveal themselves, continually be called back to. So it'll be quicker going through the other books when we talk about them, because we won't have to talk about those foundational things. And those foundational things is something that jumps up here in this next chapter, in chapter 39 to 42 or so, where Rand literally falls into the Palace of Caimlin. And you see that when he's brought before, well, even when he figures out, holy crap, I'm in the palace and you're the daughter heir and you're the prince, but I'm just going to be me. And I'm like, excuse me, I'm going to climb back over the wall and leave now. And then when he's brought before Morgase, and he starts to get stubborn, and you'll see that again popping up here. I mentioned the Great Hunt because I'm already on that. You'll see that there for sure. But that was all laid down in the first couple of chapters. Is you have a shepherd here, but you know he's something more than that, and you know he comes from a bloodline that is confident to the point of stubborn, and they're going to stick to that. And you see that when he's brought before Morgase.
Okay, take us down the book route you want to, because I got some stuff relevant to the show from this scene where they fall in. Two main points that tie to the show.
So one of my notes here is, I believe this is our first foretelling. This is our first prophecy, except for
Min.
the ones. Oh, well, okay. Yeah, we did have a little bit of prophecy with Min, because she does kind of foretell the pattern. But then, so you get kind of a twofold thing here with Elaida, because not only do you get her foretelling and kind of how that works, because you will see that a little bit more with Aes Sedai, but then you also get the Aes Sedai personality that she mutters under her breath the last little bit of it, so that she can truthfully say, I have told all that I have seen, and not be lying, but not give that last little bit to Morgase, because she wants to hold on to that herself for her own schemes.
So let's rewind for just a few minutes, because we were introduced to people when he falls in.
Yes.
So we were introduced to Elaine, who's obviously going to be integral coming forward. Gawyn, who for some reason, when I was looking for just random stuff about Wheel of Time, as I was looking for memes and stuff, there seemed to be, for some reason, this idea that the fans of the books hated Gawyn, And I'm like, where did that come from? That wasn't around when we were on the message boards way back when. It must be the new fans that hate him for some reason.
And it was newer. It started, it wasn't a huge thing. It's one of those things that I feel like started from a kernel of something and then became a meme, as often happens on the internet. It started around Lord of Chaos with what he does there, and I won't go too much more into it there. But the poor guy, the character does have a really rough road.
And a lot of internal conflict.
Yes.
Just being who he is and having to make the decisions he had to make for all kinds of various reasons that a lot of them had multiple goods. As Sam Harris would say, the landscape sometimes has lots of peaks. So I didn't understand that hate, but I don't know. I don't know if it's the newer crowd or if I just missed something way back when, because he is kind of your typical manly man, but still gentle kind of guy, reasonable, but can be stubborn.
He also right off the bat, you see a big element of his character, or both of their characters really. Elaine has a different way of portraying it, but they are noble without being haughty most of the time. They even though they carry themselves with a bit of an air of superiority, they are still, they don't look down at the common folk as lesser, just common.
And then we get Galad.
And then we get Galad,
which is one of my favorite characters. We were talking about characters going forward, which a lot of people would seem surprising because he's so pure and so straightforward and by the books. So these are two people that I really worry about the casting going forward.
Oh yeah,
because it has nothing to do with the woke. These are delicate people to cast realistically, because it's so important that you get this right for the story to work. Otherwise, you're just going to have a kind of a tattletale dick in Galad, and
and he's not that. So this is a note I actually took, I think, for something in the Great Hunt, but I remember noting this about someone that, and I kind of mentioned it when you brought up Master Gil, the innkeeper, is that you almost never see a trope or an archetype in the Wheel of Time. Jordan doesn't write characters like that. Galad is set up that way, but that's because you're getting him from Elaine's perspective. When you start to see him, when he starts to interact with more people and you start to see him more, you realize he's not a trope, and that's why he works so well and becomes, interesting down the road. It's what's his bucket? Game of Thrones, before it got bad and annoying, what was it, around season 4 or 5, where Jaime Lannister loses his hand? And I don't remember if I was texting you or someone else that I was pissed off that the show was making me like him, because that's the kind of thing with Galad is, and that's, again, they ruined it at the end because he just completely reverts. But he had a good arc of, he starts off like this and you think you know who he is, and then you realize, oh no, there's more to it there.
Well, I said this about another character. I don't know if I said it in our text, but it's one I said, I can't wait for the Great Hunt to talk about this guy. And you're talking about a kind of a rise, fall, redemption story.
Yeah.
And Galad is the opposite. He's fall, rise. No, excuse me, Lannister. Lannister was the opposite. He was down, rise, then down again character. And from getting things from Elaine's point of view, you can see that kind of same arc, except I do have my complaints about the ending of this series, but Galad's role was not one of them. I liked how he was done all the way through. And so that's one of the reasons he's one of my favorites, is because he was done well from beginning to end. Nothing ruined the essence of him in the whole thing. So, back to the books, I just wanted to point out, we meet these people that are going to be really important. And, Morgase and Elaida, obviously, for those watching the series, we have our own theory on her going forward. Again, they skipped Caemlyn. Our thing is, and if you spoiler alert, jazz hands, we think Leandrin and Elaida are going to be combined as one character. It just seems like they're going down that way because they've never developed Elaida, and she's already supposed to be doing stuff at this point, right? No spoilers. Okay. So those characters were ones that I thought are very integral going forward. And that's why this chapter is so important, because you have to get that backdrop before they make sense, even though they pop in later. Gareth Bryan being another one.
Yeah.
You
know. Any more thoughts on that interaction before I jump on?
What was the foretelling again?
Oh, that was I want to say 6:13 was that.
Well, while you're looking that up, my other thing was during that interaction with Elaida, a lot of the Wokies use this as part of their argument that the Two Rivers people are darker of skin, because she pulls back his shirt and says no one with that complexion would be from the Two Rivers. But I think there's two holes in that argument. Yeah, on the surface, it seems like it, because obviously Rand is lighter skinned than the other Two Rivers, what's known to be Two Rivers. So he's also, again, he's a ginger. And he's got the red hair and the blue eyes too, or the gray eyes, or whatever it's supposed to be, really bright eyes. And the other part is she had to pull his shirt back to see it.
So the Sundark part of him would have
passed
in line.
Yeah. Maybe it was a little light enough that she had that thought to pull his shirt back, but she had to do this act to expose, sun-touched skin to actually make a conclusive statement about it. So it's not as big an argument as the Wokies think it is. There's too many holes in it. It's one of those things that's still up in the air. We could go back and forth on that.
Okay, so page 614 is her foretelling. There's not much. This is really just teasing what they already ruined if you watch the show. This I foretell, Elaida replied, and swear under the light that I can say no clearer. From this day Andor marches toward pain and division. The shadow has yet to darken to its blackest, and I cannot see if the light will come after. Where the world has wept one tear, it will weep thousands. This I foretell. Pall of silence clung to the room, broken only by Morgase expelling her breath as if it were her last. Elaida continued to stare into Rand's eyes. She spoke again, barely moving her lips, so softly that he could barely hear her less than an arm's length away. This too I foretell. Pain and division come to the whole world, and this man stands at the heart of it. I obey the queen, she whispered, and speak it clearly. So that's her being a conniving little witch. There are some things in there that are interesting. I don't know how much we can talk about with getting spoiled without getting spoilery, but she does say specifically Andor marches towards pain and division, and nobody picks that up. Because then the second part is the whole world marches towards pain and division, and he stands at the center. So Jordan's dropping some clues there that the characters aren't picking up on, but that the reader can pick up on.
Well, I also like that, she specifically says that. So Andor and the whole world are marching towards pain and division. That's a very direct statement, even though we don't know what it is. But it's I foretell this will happen. We'll go back to our fate argument. But there was a lot of hims and haws and mays in that first statement. I can't see this clearly. I don't know if we're going to come out of the light's going to come out after the darkness. So there's an unknown element to that future. So these things will happen, but we don't know what the ultimate result's going to be. I can't see that definitely. And there may be something that can be done about it. It could go either direction.
Yeah. Which kind of calls back to what the Dark One is trying to do, which we've got a glimpse of and we're about to get more into, which is slay the great serpent and break the wheel of time, kill time itself. So if he succeeds, you wouldn't be able to see past that. So it's unclear.
But again, if we go by the everything is fated thing, then he by fate he would have he would have been able to do it or not been able to do it, one of the two.
There's a great scene on page 624. This is one of the thing that made me tell you how much I like Master Gil, is when he stands up to the White Cloaks and he tells them to get lost, and they start bad mouthing the Queen and Caemlyn, and the whole room just stands up and stares at him. I think it's a great call to action of ordinary folk. If you just stand up together against bullies, then they lose their power. Both, just in a general philosophical sense, it's great, but then also within the world, it is kind of a hint at what is to come in a long series, as normal people start doing stuff.
Well, and that's a concept that we bring into our other conversations that aren't book related, but again, he's addressing topics that are important in real life. That's nationalism right there, because they badmouth the Queen. Again, we brought this up last time. They're the people that came in and they have these liberties because they are this badass unit, this powerful unit of or powerful entity, I should say, in this world. But there is a limit to it. And these people are Andorans first. They may be even Caemliners first, Caemliners first. So that element of nationalism had a positive end result there, because this pox that gets in these countries and destroys it from the inside out is now being fought by the immune system that is that nationalism. Now, again, we see in a lot of parts of these books where that goes too far. So it's positive here, but in their dealings with Carhine or whatever, we get a little bit of, oh, this is when it gets in the way. So he's talking about this phenomenon we have in real life, which is nationalism can be good until it's not, in fiction.
Yeah. So the next big scene is Matt getting temporarily healed by Moraine, and it made me rant a little in my brain about the series, because the scene is so great because you've had this setup. We didn't have any time to see Matt's descent into.
No, we had 3 months and 3 months later.
Despair and suspicion and depression and all of this. You see that, and then you get that contrasted with Rand, ecstatic that these people are finally here. His friends have finally made it, and come on, let's go see Matt. And then Matt starts acting really freaky.
Yeah, and we got a little bit more of the progression in the books, whereas it actually it's even worse in the series, where it says and 3 months later, so you just get this blip in time. But he progressed more down that road in the day after those 3 months than he did during the 3 months. We didn't get and 3 months later and he just looks like shit.
Yes,
we got him starting to look a little worse, and then a day later looking like shit and being paranoid of everybody.
Yeah. And their way of playing it off to make it faster is to hint that, well, maybe he can channel him, he's going crazy, and so he killed that family. Okay, well, that really didn't do much for me.
Yeah, I don't want to rant about that part of the series. That was bad, but it wasn't the worst part. So
there's plenty more.
I think we should just move on from that.
Well, and without that setup, then there's more setup and payoff when Matt comes back to himself and he, joins the group in the library, and he's back to himself, and so then you get, that dose of satisfaction there. Yo, I had a passage here that I can't find.
Well, are you talking about what he says to like Nynaeve and stuff? Okay, so it's the bottom of page 629.
No, I was looking for something else.
Oh, okay.
But yeah.
But yeah, that's kind of fun because it also shows there's something deeper to it because he's almost taking on this
That's a good point.
sarcastic, dark wisdom in his craziness. When he's doing his little monologue about Nynaeve and kind of basically psychoanalyzing her.
It's showing you how Mordeth did what he did. That
Mhm.
he had this insight to be able to push people's buttons to find their most vulnerable points in order to push them in the direction he wanted. And that's he managed to do that with an entire city and get everyone acting that way.
Well, he was the worst kind of person. He was what would be called the dark empath, where it's the triad of narcissism, Machiavellian, and sociopath, but with the skill of empathy. And it's still debatable whether they actually feel it, but they understand it very well. And they can mimic it in a lot of ways. And so he can use other people's emotions against them with nothing but self-gain in the process. And Mordeth is a caricature of that. He is the embodiment of that and how it can go wrong and how a whole society could fall when someone gets in an influential position that has this characteristic.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So this may get a little spoilery. I don't know, because this was something that I don't know if I've ever really noticed before, and I'm curious what it means.
What page?
All right, so page 640.
Okay. Backdrop here, they're talking about to Loyal about going through the ways.
Yeah. Well, they haven't quite gotten there yet, because he's about to relay his story about the traveling people and the Eye of the World. So okay, there was a man came to studying Shanghai a little while back. This was not unusual in itself at the time, since a great many refugees had come to the spine of the world, fleeing what you humans call the Eye of War. Okay, so that was the first thing that jumped out at me. Hold on a second. So this was 20 years ago, or not quite 20, 18-ish years ago, right? So there's a huge time difference between the story Perrin's about to tell, which, as I recall, was a year or two ago, when Rayan told the story. This happened a year or two ago when a caravan was crossing the waste, and now you have something that's already happening. So you've got the Dark One already moving, and yet it's been 18 years and nothing has quite happened yet, which I found interesting. This great span of time. So,
well, I took that as that corresponded with the child being born, and the dragon is actually around 18 at this point, and so they just haven't been able to find him. So they've been using the ways to look, but just like Moiraine hasn't been able to find him until this exact moment.
I don't know if I've ever really gone and looked this up to see what other people think or thought through it much myself, because I've always kind of conflated Perrin's story and Loyal's story. And then the third point that pushes Moiraine to go to the Eye of the World is then what Balsmont says in their dreams. But this is very different from Perrin's story of who the heck is this guy? He was at the point of death, though there was no wound or mark on him. The elders thought it might be something Aes Sedai had done. Loyal gave Moiraine an apologetic look, since as soon as he was within the steading, he quickly got well. A few months, one night he left without a word to anyone, simply sneaked away when the moon was down. Yes, brief. Before he left, he told a curious tale, which he said he meant to carry to Tar Valon. He said the Dark One intended to blind the Eye of the World and slay the great serpent, kill time itself. The elders said he was as sound in his mind as in his body, but that was what he said. What I have wanted to ask is, can the Dark One do such a thing? Kill time itself and the Eye of the World. Can he blind the Eye of the great serpent? What does it mean? So I'm not sure we really ever come back to Loyal's story there of, or even the traveling people one either of who were these people and how did they find this out? I find that odd. And so that may be something I have to keep an eye out for as we do this reread of something I don't remember ever really getting into before.
I'm trying to recall this part. Did they say what was he a tinker or was he?
No, see, and I've always conflated that in my head, I think, of merging the two stories, but he wasn't. He was just someone they thought was a refugee from the Aiel War.
Now I'm really curious to go forward if we actually figure out who that person was. Bless you. Bless you again.
Okay.
Knock Muckles instinct.
All right. So we've ranted about this, so I won't spend much time on it. You have 3 points coming together here to create an impetus for going to the Eye of the World and going there in a hurry. Whereas in the show, it was just, okay, let's go do this thing now. And it was really annoying. So a little on into this conversation where when the boys admit to the dreams they've been having and they talk about the stuff that Balsamon said, and I thought it was interesting. So for anyone who doesn't know, the father of lies, I don't know where else it might be used, but it comes from the Bible because it is a term used for the devil. And I find it interesting and instructive philosophically that even though he's called the father of lies, he doesn't straight up lie. He uses half-truths.
Which is, I think, an interesting little kind of parallel to these books, because one of the main premise of the Aes Sedai is they don't lie, but they lie. They lie without lying. And it's one of the major themes throughout the whole thing.
Yeah.
And how good they are at doing that.
It is kind of a photo negative of each other.
You know, but we're also look at the names and who's used for what. So there are, Balsamon versus, different biblical names. And then you look at Luz Theron, who was derived from Lucifer. And he was the good guy from the Age of Legends. So
he turned into the bad guy.
Yeah. He fell from high, right?
Yeah.
So it's this is where Jordan starts using myth to tell his story as well as telling his story. And things are more complicated than you would originally think. It's not just them and us. It's we're not quite sure who's them, because sometimes them looks like us and sometimes us looks like them. And sometimes us can be them if we really dig deep. So this is where he starts really getting complicated. Did I throw you off?
No, I was giving me time to find the next thing. So page 649, Moiraine has a great statement here towards the middle there, where she's got to convince Loyal to break the edict of the elders and lead them through the ways. The greater part of the world does not even know it yet, and most of the few who do fight skirmishes and believe they are battles. While the world refuses to believe, the Dark One may be at the brink of victory. There is enough power in the Eye of the World to undo his prison. If the Dark One has found some way to bend the Eye of the World to his use, ... So that was something I'd kind of forgotten, because they don't really address it in the series at all. But that's the point of the Eye of the World from the Dark One's perspective, and why they have to go to keep him from using it.
As bad as the series was overall, this is actually even the weakest part of the series, this whole we're making the decision to go through the ways and get to the eye of the world. They never explain the eye of the world. They never do any of that. They poorly explain the ways. They have it done differently, and then they even had bad cinematography in the process. So this was just overall, these episodes right here were just the worst part of even a bad series.
And here in the book, you've got a rising climax that this is where it's really racing to the end, starting at this point, where it's going to be more heavily suspense and action oriented as you run to the end here. I also just like the again, time is a circle. The wheel of time turns, and there are always points in time, cough, cough, hint, hint, the time we live in now, where people don't even realize they're living in a time of trial because they can't see the forest for the trees. They're just fighting their little battles and then ignoring this is just part of this greater thing, and you're not addressing the greater thing, so you're going to lose. And which is Maureen's point, is we need to go right to the source to stop this.
Douglas Murray, the barbarians will be at the gate and we'll be trying to decide what gender they are.
Yeah.
I feel we can get political when we're talking these because most of our audience came in with the woke Wheel of Time episode.
Yep.
And if you're still around, you know where we stand and you know why. So, but
so I jumped quite a bit to my next note. Did you have any thoughts on when they actually enter the ways?
Well, I think it's important to know that there was a process to it that didn't involve the one power.
Yep.
The ways were something different. And that's important for a lot of reasons. Because first of all, it allows Perrin to do what he does in book 4, period. It kind of creates the one power doesn't solve everything dynamic, because if the one power solved everything, Moiraine would be able to handle it. She wouldn't need Loyal.
You know, it's something I had forgotten until I got to the end of that sequence in the book. You still had her cool power moment because the leaf is gone on the other end. And I'd forgotten that. And she has to cut the stone. It's an actual stone door, not just 2 pillars. There's an actual stone door and she has to cut it open with the power so they can hurry up and get out before.
Yeah, I had forgotten about that moment. I didn't get to go through these as much as I wanted to today, but yeah, I'd forgotten about that. Now that I think about it, that's actually a good scene right there. If we want to skip to now, let's talk about going through the ways first. So you get this again a lot more from the book because, well, I mean, this is where a book can be just more descriptive, anyways. This how expansive they are, how huge this nothingness is. It's a void. It's a void with pathways in it, is what it is. And you fall off, you fall till you die of starvation and dehydration, right? You don't fall till you hit something and die. But it also describes how it's crumbling, which is also important because we're going back to the main theme. The fabric of time is coming apart. Everything is dissipating. So these are things that we're not able to get except through this deep descriptive process. And again, I think they're all important because this is something outside of the power. This is something else. And I don't even know if they finished describing. You're just kind of left because apparently they were grown, right? The ways were grown, but they never kind of got to the end point of this is how the ogre did it, or this is how whoever ultimately did it. And it was I just think you lose that expansiveness. You lose that big unknown that actually adds to the story. Because same with Mordeath. We don't have that depth with the evil coming out of Shadar Logoth in the series like we do in the books.
Because there wasn't a person that we met that something that personified the evil that we talked about here.
And because they had Moiraine knocked out at that point, they never explained the history either.
Yep.
You know, which they could have come back and done later when she removed the dagger. This is why I said don't do this. You know, she could have done her little monologue. That would have been a place where in the books even it was a tell you instead of show you. We could have been shown this thing and then she tell the story and we're like, oh, that's what we were seeing. Oh, okay, I get it now. So this is I think is something that we're missing that actually adds to the depth of the story. Is there are things that we can't figure out yet or we don't know yet in our reading, and are we going to learn? Is it going to be something that stays mysterious? But again, it adds that dimension of not everything's about the power. Some things are separate and they're still useful. Loyal's more useful.
Yeah.
Yep.
He has to translate and guide them along the ways.
Although I did see a funny meme when I was looking, and they were in the ways, and it was where Perrin from the show, the Perrin from the show, he says, "There's something ahead," when he sees it before they do, and they all run up. It's in a guidepost, and on the guidepost is a Shen Yun poster.
Well, all right then.
All right, back to the books. Okay, so then we get to the end. We see Mansion Shin.
And it, all they hear are the creepy voices. They've got it. They know it's coming, but it does not overtake them yet, because if it overtakes you, you're in bad trouble.
And I like the book version where he's chanting the just nastiness.
Yeah.
But I actually, this is a point where I understand what they did in the show, because they had to catch people up on some things. And because we don't get the inner thoughts we get in the book, they had to put some of those out some way, somehow. So I actually like what they did there. How it visually was represented, I wasn't a big fan, but what they did there in that last,
they heard their own voices.
Yeah.
The talking was in their own voices. It was kind of a cross between the Shadow Logoth fog, the idea of Shadow Logoth and the Machin Shin, which is just pure insanity in the book. And
it was done in a way of, am I hearing this thing telling me something, or am I actually talking to myself?
Yeah.
Are these really my thoughts? And they were really the thoughts, because the wind was really kind of reading their thoughts. But then they went and ruined it by going, yes, another badass Nynaeve moment. Let's have her save the day again. But in the book, the badass moment was Moiraine cutting open the door, and then the wind itself trying to push out of the ways. Again, we're getting that element of the ways are something different. It's trying to push out of the ways, but it can't. And
so skipping along, wait, what? So when once they get to Faldara and they're making their plans to go to the Eye of the World, I don't understand the choices that, well, I mean, I guess I kind of do, because I think the reason they split everybody up in the series is they were trying to set things up for the next season more quickly, rather than having a lot of the prologue that you have, like you can kind of skip like the first third of the Great Hunt now, and jump right to it. But the way it is, what it is in the book, is because, so on page 692 is when Rand is trying to talk Egwene and Nynaeve into staying behind. And I know what you are trying to do, Rand. I have little liking for any Aes Sedai, and this one least of all, I think. I have less for going into the Blight, but least of all is the liking I have for the Father of Lies. If you boys, you men, can do what has to be done when you'd rather do almost anything else, why do you think I will do less? Or Gawyn? And she's talking about their place in the pattern. and this is something that's going to come up a lot. And I actually I took a lot of notes about this because it's something that kind of comes up a lot in the Great Hunt, when the Aes Sedai are starting to talk amongst themselves about prophecy and about the pattern and whatnot. It's so much more complicated than what you think it is, because it's not just, I mean, even for someone like Rand, who is Tavern, okay, yes, that means his thread is doing things to the other threads, but you also have to take into account all those other threads. So it's like it's why I usually get annoyed when someone talks about how a game was lost because of the refs. I've said that about twice. I can think of 2 times where that's an actual, off the top of my head, where that's legitimately valid. You can make a good argument.
The Saints and Rams.
That one, and then what was it, like the 68 Olympics, I think, where the refs kept magically coming up with ways to give the Soviet Union the ball back so that they could win the gold medal game in basketball. And it's just, everyone's just kind of standing around looking. As I recall, the US team didn't even go out to get their medals. They were so incensed, and rightfully so. Anyway, but for the most part, it's, well, okay, yeah, that hurt you, but there was also this over here and that over there and this. Like I talked about, Scott Norwood and how bad he felt for missing that field goal, but okay, he made a couple of kicks that got you there in the first place, and you got totally rope-a-doped by Bill Belichick's defense, which kind of, you beat yourself with the way he defensed you, so, and you never saw that, you never adjusted for it. So there are all these other things that could have been. You also get kind of in this same passage where from Rand's point of view, where he's trying so hard to get Egwene to stay because he cares for her, but then he reiterates what Min's viewing comes back to him.
Yeah, that's where I was going to go next.
She's not for you, nor you for her, at least not in the way you both want. And so wouldn't
it be great if in the show there was still sexual tension between them when he's having these thoughts, or they even brought it up? Min could have said something. Yeah,
because there's a depth there that you don't get when you turn it into modern day hookup culture crap. It's an old fashioned puppy love, but there's also kind of an old fashioned expectation and obligation idea there that in a lot of ways, Rand and Egwene's relationship is, and the reason they have such a hard time letting go of it, I mean, it's several books before they finally let go of it, mutually, that there's kind of the small town expectation. He's the high school quarterback and she's the head cheerleader. So this is what it's supposed to be.
My only thing is, if you want the show to be popular and you're going to interject these things because cool and modern, at least show it. Damn it.
We are going to, yeah, because we're going to get into that big time in The Great Hunt, because Nynaeve goes through the accepted trial, which you have to do naked. And that's going to start coming up more and more and more in The Great Hunt. There's a ton of nudity in the books, which is why you thought that someone like an HBO or, whoever would pick it up to make it a little racier. And again, everyone's trying to have the next Game of Thrones, and yet no one actually wants to go all the way to do that.
Yeah, Game of Thrones went balls deep. Spartacus did too.
Literally.
Yeah.
And his sister.
That was just Jamie. Just Jamie.
When I started watching, I had a friend say, "Oh yeah, that's a great series. It This is how he described the whole arc of the series to him was it starts off with bad incest and ends up with good incest. Well, that's one way to look at it.
Wow. At least the good end says they didn't know.
Yes.
At least it was a surprise later. You know,
So-
they didn't grow up together. They didn't have that oh. Should we bring up Iceland again?
Everyone's a third cousin or something like that.
The average degree of difference between married partners or lovers or whatever it was third cousin. Yeah. Which means there's some first cousins and there's some second cousins and there's some fourths and there's some fifths to average it out.
That's
and
awkward.
they are very genetically not diverse, but they're also not genetically inbred either. So,
Right. Speaking of sexual weirdos, there's some cool Japanese influence here. It's so I ranted about this last time about with Rand and Illa. They're such great characters, and you never got any of that in the show because the show was more interested in the critical race theory casting. Well, kind of the same thing with Shinar. There's some really interesting, very sharp cultural divides when you go from the south to the north. So just going from the backwoods of the two rivers into Caemlyn or into Andor proper and then into Caemlyn, there was some stark cultural differences, but at least to the reader, most readers, there's going to be familiarity there because Andor is the most based on kind of medieval England.
Mm-hmm.
Then you go to Shinar and you have a culture that's heavily influenced by Japan, like Zen, and haiku. I mean, they recite poetry, for crying out loud. The warriors recite poetry, the way they dress and everything. And you don't get that. It's incredibly superficial in the series because it's just here we have some Asian actors and they're wearing kind of classical Chinese, medieval Chinese style armor. It's like, okay, great, but we don't get any of the other stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And so on page 702 is where Agelmar kind of explains the ethos of it, because Loyal is looking around and he's sad because the original city, the original keep was built by Ogier and it was raised in the Trolloc Wars. And he's sad because it's so stark now. And Agelmar gives the there's something beautiful about a simple line, about a single line placed just so, a single flower among the rocks. And then Lan recites poetry. The rose petal floats on water.
Mm-hmm.
The kingfisher flashes flashes above the pond. Life and beauty swirl in the midst of death. Yes, that one has always symbolized the whole of it to me. And everyone's looking at Lan going, what? Poetry.
And this is the most emotion you get out of Lan too. Up until this point, not screaming and wailing because someone died.
Oh, geez, why did you have to bring that up? But this is, you can have emotion without having the screaming and wailing and over the top nonsense. This is an emotional moment. And it carries some weight because of that.
Mm-hmm. When you're introduced to one of my other favorite, what we call it, bit part characters, Ingtar.
Mm-hmm.
So not going to go too much into him because we'll get a lot of him in
a
the
lot
Great
of
Hunt.
him.
Yeah.
And so then that brings in Padan Fain back in, and this is where it gets really interesting, I think, with him, and it's going to set up some interesting stuff through the series. But
Mm-hmm.
when Moiraine explains, when she comes back in, and she starts explaining what happened to Fain, and so now he's not just a dark friend. That it started with that, but then because of Shadar Logoth, and then Machin Shin swarms around him, and they they realize they're pals. So you've got layers of evil that are coming from different places. So you've got layers of evil being piled on and into this character, to really give you a hint of some badness to come.
Yeah, and it's the part of Fane you never get from the show, because he's also still kind of like a mangy dog at this point. He's not regal, he's not professional, he's not any of that.
And he's trying to be, when he's trying to kind of seduce Agelmar, and he keeps going back and forth between kind of the crazed, because there's still that, bit of scarred humanity in there that's kind of that's gone literally insane because of what has happened to him. But then there's all that other stuff piled on there, that's creating this, true psychopath. And he keeps trying to, bring that out and kind of work his magic on Agelmar.
Well, and he, again, we knowing, when we get to the basis of why he's this way, we bring that personality type forward, that dark empath, that person that is the worst of the worst, but understands other people's feelings to some degree. And when you're the worst of the worst and you understand this thing, you're going to use it to your advantage. And he very much becomes this, we'll just say thing. We're not even going to call it a human at this point.
So that's actually a good lead into, we're just about to the end here. Page 720, chapter 48, the Blight. So this was something we complained about with the show, is why did you make the Blight just this tangle of warped trees? It's
a uniform tangle of warped trees.
Uniform tangle of warped trees. And I mean, for Matt notes as they're going through, because he's the one that almost touches something, and that they don't notice at first that they're in the Blight. Things don't look that strange. It gets worse as they go. It's simply a corruption of what is. That's what the Dark One is. That's what he wants to do. And it's interesting because there's this quote that's going viral right now because of Amazon's Rings of Power crap. And so people are spreading this great quote by Tolkien of something to the effect of, evil cannot create. It can only corrupt what good men have strove to create. And that's perfectly illustrated here. I don't know that Jordan had ever heard that quote, but he was influenced by, Tolkien among others. And that's a major theme of not just the Lord of the Rings, but the entire mythos that he created, is that the evil parts, the evil actors are corruptors. In the movie, you get some of that from Saruman when he's talking about how orcs were first created. They were created as a corruption of elves.
Bring it back to real life. Wokies didn't create Hollywood. They didn't create the universities. They didn't create media, the media systems. They sure did get in there, though. Yeah, woke is the taint, right? Yeah, and without the structure that was already there, they would not have the power they have using it. So,
and when they're going through the Blight, well, there's arg. So I'm not going to go too far down this tangent because I ranted about it so much when we were talking about the show, but the scene between Lan and Nynaeve in Faldara is so infuriating because it doesn't have a fraction of the depth of what happens here when they camp within sight of the lakes and the seven towers of Malkir, and her going to him and talking to him and his responses to her. And so you get a great emotional scene, but Jordan also maintains that tension so he can keep revealing and building with that relationship down the road.
Yeah, but it's kind of it's a little harder to get jiggy out in the Blight than it is in you know.
Yeah, you don't want to stick to start dissolving your wang.
Yeah.
Um,
It's probably in his training on how to handle the Blight. Don't whip it out.
all right, so the rush through the Blight, they get to the Green Man and the Eye of the World, and now you had some stuff you wanted to talk about here at the end with the ultimate finale of this book, because there are some kind of weird and interesting things that happen here that I remember seeing on forums back in the old days more than once about people having questions about the finale of this book.
Yeah. So my mother just finished the book, and she said she was left wanting with the finale here, the final battle. And this is where I was a little concerned about spoilers, because this is actually a spot where Jordan may have dropped the ball a little bit, because you have two Forsaken show up. You have three major characters that show up at once. You have the Green Man, which we got a little bit about from Loyal and their talks before, and talking about so you get a little bit of backdrop on him, which could have been a little bit more, I think. But then you've got Agenor and Bethamel coming in, and you've got nothing on them. And they're really there for just the fight. You get very little insight into the way their character is, and what makes them who they are, why they had their position in the hierarchy that was the Forsaken, that became the Forsaken. And so you have none of that. You just know that they're more powerful than most people because they were Forsaken, and they're from the Age of Legends. They're somehow out there alive. And then we have this fight, and one of my favorite parts was the Green Man, basically planting a tree in somebody. That was awesome.
Yes.
That's one way to take someone out. But at the same time, there was no build up to that to let you know how badass that scene was.
Yeah.
I don't remember which one he puts the acorn in. I think it was Bethamel.
Yeah, I think it was.
Because I think Moiraine kills Agenor, right?
No, Rand kills him later. She holds him.
Okay, yes.
So that they can run away. And then when Rand finally grabs hold of the power from the Eye of the World, then he's able to make Bethamel toasty.
Yeah, so it's all this stuff just happens in almost a blink of an eye when it's this much book, of all of this.
Yeah,
it's a blink of an eye, and you don't get the backdrop. I wore this shirt in honor of Bethamel in that, because you learn this if you read the compendium. You learn that he was kind of a lecher, and he was Littlefinger. If you really want to make
all you get in the scene is him getting all that with his tongue.
Yeah,
towards
you get a little bit of that. That's it.
Because he can't talk because he's so desiccated because of how they were trapped. He can't talk. He can just act skeevy towards the girls.
Yeah, and if it was just left at that, you could kind of forgive the build up or the lack of build up, because it could have been, these were just the two weakest. But there was so much more to them that's important, and you find out about in the compendium, and then you kind of see hints of it later. But you'd never see those hints if you didn't read the compendium.
Yeah.
So I recommend people reading that at some point. Not get a few books in. Get at least, I think that was written about the same time as book 6. So at least get to book 6.
Yeah, 6 or 7, because I think the reason, because when we got into college and you found other nerds to talk about with this, and I said, what are you people talking about? Everyone was annoyed because it had taken longer for book 8 to come out than previous, because he was working on that at the same time.
So I'm gonna these aren't spoilers, I think, for the books, because you never find out these things in the books.
Yeah.
But there are the thing I told you about Bethamel makes it something that happens later in the books funnier and have more depth. But again, that's why I hate that it was left out of the actual book, because you get this thing later that's a grand joke that you wouldn't get unless you had this information. So
Yes.
you have that information. He was a lecher. He was, again, like I said, he's like the little finger of the Wheel of Time. Except he acted on it. Littlefinger supposedly only saved himself for whatever, but Sansa. But then there's Agenor. And Agenor is the one who made the Trollocs. He was the evil scientist. He was Lysenko, you know? That was Agenor. He wasn't the strongest in the power. That's why Rand is able to kill him at the Eye of the World. That's why Moiraine is able to hold him, even though he's from the Age of the Legends.
Yeah, even if just for a little bit. But
Yeah,
she's able to hold him enough.
His skill was he was Dr. Moreau, you know. He was the mad scientist.
He had the brains and the complete lack of ethics to create things like the Trollocs.
And just like you talked about the corruption of the elves being the orcs, he made the Trollocs from his experiments. And actually, later on in the books, we get a taste of, and I don't know if they mention his name or not in it, but we get to see the process of humans being used to make a fade. And to make the tainted blades and stuff that they use. We get to see that. I think,
I think that's the prologue to book 6.
Yeah, I think it's something like that. It's
yeah.
But at the same time, that was Agenor. And so we don't get that depth. Even little stories, we could have got, a chapter where someone's telling the Forsaken stories. And then we could have put 2 and 2 together when we found something else later.
Yeah, because about the only mention you get in the Eye of the World of the Forsaken is somebody thinking,
you get their names and that there are 13 of them, and that's pretty much
you get that there are 13. You don't even get all the names, because I know there are a couple of times where someone thinks, Ashamil, I think it's Perrin thinking Ashamil comes to get boys who don't mind their mothers, and land fear something. So there are these kind of Grimm's fairy tales kind of around them used to scare children, but you don't even get all the names.
Yeah, that would have been fine there, because you could have just had this little blurb of a story about each one.
If he would have scattered some more of that throughout the book, so that eventually you get it, the names and just a sentence or two of who each of the 13 were.
And knowing the stuff from the compendium and then stuff that happens later, that battle's not so bad. But because you have zero knowledge going into it, and then you have to actually go out of your way outside of the books to get some of that knowledge, I think that was a shortcoming.
I also think that he's trying to continue to be too cryptic when, okay, this is the finale. Just say more bluntly and plainly what Rand is doing here.
Yeah, these are 2 people you're killing off. Be a little bit more blunt in this situation.
Yes.
Yeah.
And even that the scene there where Rand is alone trying to face down Agenor, it's still kind of cryptic about what's going on there. He is opening himself up to Sidon, and
for the first time, consciously, yeah.
And he's grabbing hold of the pool of it that is in the Eye of the World, and he's pulling it away from Agenor, who's trying to pull in all of this raw power basically to himself, so he can do whatever shenanigans it is that he wants to do with it. Which according to Moiraine earlier, he theoretically could have cracked open the prison to the Dark One.
Yes.
And instead Rand takes it, and he siphons off all of that whole pool of power to go do his thing.
So yeah, that was the big complaint that I got from somebody that just read it for the first time. But let's compare it to the show.
Well, what I was curious about, where I thought you might go, is one of the oft repeated questions in the forums back in the day was, what the heck is that voice that's in all caps that is talking to Rand? And it's the very end. It's when he's pulled in the Eye of the World. He's killed Agenor. And then all of a sudden there's just these all caps. It is not here. I will take no part. Only the chosen one can do what must be done if he will. uh, and this is where he's kind of acting subconsciously. And so where he pops around to different places, based on the prompting from this voice. So it's on page 758.
Yeah, I'm there. So I'm reading the 2 paragraphs between it. Yeah, I'm gonna have to fully reread that whole section again because I don't.
There's also even just getting there, because he's thinking in his head, he keeps repeating away. He's trying to get away. So he lights Agenor on fire, turns him to a crisp, and he's yelling in his head away. And Rand was no longer on the hilltop. So that's when he pops over to Tarwin's Gap.
Okay, so this might be a huge spoiler if I say what I think I need to say, because we might be entering into the realm of the world of dreams.
It's possible,
because he willed being away and he was somewhere else. That is part of the world of dreams. And so
because
the eye of the world,
he doesn't create any kind of gateway. And then when he's done at Tarwin's Gap and that voice shows up, then he creates an opening that he goes through, and that takes him to where Balsamon is.
Yeah, so the eye of the world might be the pivot point between the world of dreams and the real world.
That's a possibility, because that's something that's always bugged me, is how did he go from the eye to Tarwin's Gap just like that?
Okay,
so
just
thinking it.
So Jazz Hands, this might be huge spoilers going forward, because this is actually a thought I've never had about this spot, and now that we're having it in real time, knowing things we know from later in the books, because we know Shamil, because okay, so these are the spoilers. So again, if you're still listening, stop listening if you don't want any spoilers. Things we know: Shamil wasn't completely free. He could only touch the world in the world of dreams, but he's here in this scene. He moved without using the power, so also something you can do in the world of dreams. And here's my thought on the voice: it's Arthur Hawkwing. We will not take part. How many times in Guidal Kane and Birgitti's story did they talk about not taking part in human affairs unless the horn was blown, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera?
Well, the general consensus on the forums I found is that it's the voice of the creator,
which was kind of the obvious one. But now that I'm thinking about this being the world of dreams more and more and more, it's Arthur Hawkwing. He's the most powerful Ta'veren.
And it would make sense too that
I'm gonna have to find the scene in Fall Me. We're still in spoilers. I'm gonna have to find the scene in Fall Me and see how Hawkwing talks to Rand, because if he calls him the chosen one.
But the eye, the green man, always moving, never being found in the same place twice, always being where the need is a major part of. So I hadn't thought about that before.
The eye of the world is the hole between the fabric.
It is somehow a link or a pivot or a point there that kind of crosses over between the two worlds.
Well, now we've got to play on words too, because the eye of the world, think of eye seeing, the iris, the Egyptian eye and everything. And then the world of dreams, you're seeing the future, you're seeing prophecy, you're seeing what is, what could be, all of these things. So the eye of the world could be that connection point between the real world and the world of dreams.
Could be.
Which could still make the voice the creator, because the creator would have presence there.
Yeah, that makes that whole finale sequence make a lot more sense if
But
that's what's
again, we
going
needed a
on.
little bit more backdrop there, or a little bit more conclusions later, a little bit more brought out later, where someone says, remember when we were in the eye of the world and this and this and this happened? Well, now that I know about dreaming, I think this.
Jazz hands over. Woo, no more.
Well, oh, I was going to bring up one other person that could have filled in that gap later in the books too. The
well, there's a lot of that, and we're gonna get to that more, and it is so there are plenty of places where in the Great Hunt Jordan could have revealed a little more exposition about what actually happened there, that you don't actually get now that you bring that up about where the ending is a little weak, especially with how good the rest of the book is then a lot of our speculation is from stuff that happens way down. That's why we're giving out the spoiler warnings, because it's big stuff that happens way down, but there are plenty of times in the Great Hunt, so right after the fact. And so not only do you still have it in the reader's mind because they're kind of wondering what happened here, but it's still fresh in the characters' minds too. So it would make plenty of sense that they would be talking about these things or thinking about these things. But
well, especially since in the Great Hunt, we get introduced to quantum physics. So
we'll get there in a second. But overall, the point of this was to show how and why it works so well, and the show didn't. But he is setting up a lot of stuff here that is going to continue to pay off down the road. And it's, we'll probably get through the Great Hunt way faster, because to me, the Great Hunt is one of the weaker ones in the series. And that may not be entirely fair, because the Eye of the World is
I brought up 3 big points that at least were super important that we should talk about. And I think it'll be about a 4-episode book.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of busy work time, but they all revolve around kind of one concept in their travel, which is, again, I brought up the quantum physics.
Yep.
But there's also a very important character we get, Celine, that I think is worth a whole episode in herself.
There's an awful lot of plot points set up, but there's not nearly as much character or world set up, because he did so much of that in the Eye of the World. He did such a good job of laying that foundation that now, once you get into the Great Hunt, it's all meat and potatoes plot stuff.
Well, when it's important that a whole book came out of this thing where not a whole lot happened, but a lot of movement happened, because we still have that sense of how much time goes by in travel.
Yeah.
And that, again, that's something we completely lost in the show with just a little blurb and 3 months later. Yep. Realistically, if you look at the Great Hunt, you could say they are in Faldara. They go on this journey, and 3 months later, they're in Falme. You really could, except that they showed the depth of the travel throughout the way. With maybe one scene in there with, again, we introduced Celine, who I think is one of the more important people that comes out of that book. But yeah, it's start in Faldara, end up in Falme. A couple things happened in between.
Yeah.
Do not use that as an excuse not to read that book, because you need to know what happens in between to understand some stuff.
Yeah. So I've been reading through it a lot faster and taking fewer notes. So we'll get to that when we get to that next time, hopefully, unless real life stuff annoys the crap out of us again.
Well, no, it wasn't too bad today. I had a bunch of honeydews, and we talked about this in last Sexy Time with Sam. One thing I do know, because I do stuff around the house all the time, and that makes my wife happy. But that kind of plays into it, because I like doing the projects I do around the house. So it's not a big deal, but there's an above and beyond. So her sister, her twin sister, is a single mommy. And if I take that same thing and extend it to that part of her family and take care of her sister as well, that makes her extremely happy. So she's a little happy with me doing it around the house. But if I help her sister out, that makes her really, really happy. And so it's a good thing for me to go and do those projects around her house too. So it's worth the time. But go back to the last sexy time with Sammy to get the full explanation of why that's important. But
Yep. Well, next time, hopefully we will talk about the Great Hunt, unless I have to rant about this British Medical Journal article that was getting censored by Facebook, because that's who you want. That's who you want fact checking your medical journals is Facebook.
This is actually not super new. This is like,
I know,
a month
this
old.
has been going on. That's what I was so surprised
yeah.
at. Is like there's like a newer kind of bout that has happened, but has been going on for a while, which made me go, yikes.
Yeah, it's a good little story, I guess, to rant about, because I need to too. But also that makes that brings a secondary point, because there is a lot wrong with a lot of the medical journals right now, such as the Lancet and particularly American medical journals, with the whole woke movement as well. And it's out of one, at one side of my mouth, I want to say Facebook is saying this to the medical journals, but then realistically, who am I? I'm less than Facebook, right? But I can bring up Lancet articles and stuff that are factually incorrect as well. So it's really tough, because some institutions have been taken over that used to be credible, versus British Medical Journal still does a good job of staying credible, but now they're being fact checked because they don't agree with the ones that used to be credible.
We may just talk about that generally next time, is the idea of fact check. It's not really fact checking, it's narrative checking. So we may just talk about that more generally, and then we'll try and get into the Great Hunt.
All right. Well, we'll do it like we've been doing. For those who follow, we'll do a part 1, part 2, and we'll specify which is which.
Yep.
All right. Like, subscribe, follow. We didn't give any advice other than keep reading, following along.
Yeah. Are we allowed to tell people to keep reading? We're not like professors of literature, so I don't know if we're experts.
We're not experts.
Allowed.
That's right. I mean,
don't read. Whatever you do, don't read.
I have a master's degree. I've done a lot of reading.
Oh, okay. Well, I guess that
counts. Am I an expert? I've written articles. They're not in this speak. They're in biomechanics speak. But
hey, there are all sorts of Tolkien experts coming out of the woodwork now to say, no, Tolkien was fine with, CRT and gender studies and woke nonsense being shoved into his work. So sure, who can't be an expert now?
Especially when the only person that could rebut that is dead.
And on that cheery note,
Yeah.
see y'all next time.
See y'all next time.